Welcome to the bridge. Back at it again here this week with my co-host Zach. Really got a good, interesting album. Kind of a Australian artist that is popping at the moment. Um, you've been living some pretty decent weather here in St. John's. Looks like spring. Expecting snow this weekend, so that's gonna suck. But it's lifted my mood as of late, and I think this album has helped uh, be the soundtrack to that for me this week. What's the weather there like in Germany?
Yeah, the spring weather is starting to come around. However, the corona pandemic is still raging. So, yeah,
Not
there's
much to enjoy.
not much to enjoy except the beautiful nature. And
Right,
luckily there's lots of parks in the city, so.
that's perfect.
Hmm.
So this week we are covering Genesis Uwusu and his debut album, "Smiling with No Teeth." So, had you heard anything of this artist before we decided to talk about him this week?
I had no idea who he was.
I think that's pretty common. I didn't really know about him until I started going and doing some looking and listening to some tracks, and uh, some of the tracks off this album really caught my attention. Really not what I was expecting from the album cover and the kind of energy that it exudes. But this is a
The
very
album,
interesting album.
yeah, the album cover, in my opinion, is a bit of a misfire. It doesn't really represent the sound that's on the record.
No, not at all. You would think more, um, maybe like that this trap wave that's been going on. You'd expect something
Yeah.
more in that pocket. Um, but maybe that's the point that he's trying to convey here. Because in a world of trap music being all the rage and twittering hi hats, this album is a pretty big fresh air, a breath of fresh air, I would say.
Yeah, it brings in a lot of R&B elements and some funk too, which I really like, and then combines rap as well
Right.
on some tracks.
There's a lot of I would say a combination of black music in general on this album, be it your funk or your rap or some of your soul and even some maybe not so much black oriented music like new wave and synth pop as well on this album.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely not one specific track I can think of in particular.
Right. There's a lot of influences I actually felt going through this album that really stood out to me. One of them being gorillas. Uh, did you pick up on that as well?
No, I didn't really get a Gorillaz vibe. Makes a little bit of sense now that you mention it, but it never crossed my mind.
Right. I was listening to this and I got a lot of that eclectic beat that you would get in a Gorillaz album. Some more of the more modern Gorillaz, I would say. Um, and then a lot of the funk and like I feel like they're pulling some similar influences over this, but there's also some Talking Head influences, Kendrick Lamar, Prince, uh, a lot of people in that domain that Genesis is pulling from to pull this album together.
Yeah, I got the Prince vibes. I got the Kendrick Lamar vibes. Talking Heads is interesting just because they're such a distinct band. Maybe like not yeah, maybe not Remain in Light, but maybe some of the other albums from Talking Heads.
That new wave kind of synth pop element to it that I would pull from this, and he's actually cited them as influences himself. Uh,
Okay,
so
yeah.
that's where I think they're coming from.
It definitely has a early 80s new wave vibe going on some of these songs for sure.
Absolutely, I think there's a lot of that feeling. The album is also 54 minutes long, um, 53 plus. So it's a bit of a longer album, but I think it
Fif
does a good job filling that time with a lot of compelling music. Actually, I would think.
There's not one lazy song I don't find on the whole album.
Right. I would argue there's some miss how would I phrase this? Some messy songs, I would say, but nothing I would say intentionally lazy or anything like that. Everything has an effort to it and a creativity to it. I don't think everything comes together quite the way that he wants it to on some of these tracks, but there's definitely an effort and an attempt to create something unique, or at least inspired, on every one of these tracks, which is can't be downplayed.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of an eclectic arrangement of songs. And I just wonder because it's 54 minutes, 53 minutes, and also 15 tracks.
Right.
And even though I say there's not one lazy song, that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't feel that perhaps some of the songs were filler, or not even necessarily filler, but I wonder whether or not they were necessary to put on the album.
Right. There's a few. I feel like they're all pretty good, at least at the very bare minimum. But the album does get a little clogged during some listens. But I think they still do a good job with pacing and keeping everything going and flowing in a well and structured way. Regardless of that, like for if they're gonna do a 53-minute album, I think, or 54, I think they do a pretty good job of putting it together. If you're going to do that, but I do agree with you. Maybe a few trims here and there would definitely help the listening experience.
Yeah.
So this is a Australian artist, originally from Ghana. Or Australian transplant from Ghana. I believe he said he moved there when he was 2. So most of his life has been being raised in a very white area of Australia, and that leads into a lot of the lyrics and some of the content and song topics that he'll cover on this album. Growing up in such a dominantly white area.
Yeah, I picked that up in the lyrics too, specifically on the title track, Smiling with No Teeth.
Right, right. So how did your initial listens go with this one when you first put it on? Kind of how would your reaction come across?
Well, I already shared my reaction about the album cover, so I came in thinking it was going to be like a trap album,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not. But then when I put on the first song, On the Move, I shuddered a little bit because I said, oh no, is this going to be an hour of sort of oversaturated, super produced music that is not gonna be something that could be reproduced on stage and therefore lose not have much of a human touch and therefore leave me cold. But luckily, as the listening progressed and I got into the album and saw the spectrum of genres and influences that he played with and sort of dialed back on the production effects and in fact incorporated more analog type instruments, I was pleasantly surprised.
Right, right. This is a very experimental, tinged album. There's a lot of ideas uh, put on this album. A lot of them are really good. Some of them probably weren't developed to their potential, or maybe should have been left alone. I think of some songs like "Centerfold" that comes to my mind when I say that, which is a very choppy song that
Hmm.
with some elements I don't think really quite come together, but it's eclectic enough and it holds a personality and energy that it isn't bad. But I feel like maybe that is one of those times where he's experimenting through this album that I think maybe a little more workshopping could have fixed the song a little bit better. The
I
first
think
song, go ahead.
I think Centerfold is a good example of how the vocal distortion he plays around with vocal distortion and vocal sound effects a fair amount on the record, and I think Centerfold is a case where it falls flat for me, anyways.
Right, right. Um, the first song, actually, I don't know if you picked this up, and for me, immediately, it sounded like he was doing his best MC Ride impression. Um, and there are a few times on this album where I feel like he has a very distinctive performance that is very reminiscent of some other act, be it Prince or Anderson .Paak or MC Ride here on the opening, when he kind of delves into some of the more punky kind of aesthetics that he does, or like kind of more of a synth punk kind of element. Um,
Mm-hmm.
on the Move fits that. Black Dogs is another one that fits that aesthetic to me. Both these songs that I just mentioned are less than 2 minutes long. They kind of pull a little bit of punk element. On the Move, I didn't dislike that song. I actually kind of enjoyed it, but it does give a bit of a. Um, it doesn't quite encompass what the album is, and I can see it being very misleading. Um, in fact, when I first heard it, I also had a different impression of what I was going to be hearing on the rest of the album. I was expecting some more Denzel Curry, banger, deep vocals, a little more strained and shouty in that kind of Florida pocket of hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not what I got at all. In fact, I got a lot of 80s nostalgia on this album, which starts to come out more in the second track, The Other Black Dog.
Yeah, Waiting on You is another song that he stretches the song out really long. It's the longest track on the record. And towards the end, I think the last minute and 15 or the last minute, there's like it almost becomes a whole new song. There's like a whole new movement that sort of it has a bit of a tacked on feel.
Right. There's a kind of a collage of ideas going on this album, and I would have liked to see him trim some of them and kept some of the more stronger ones alive. But I think there's a bit. I think he was a bit overambitious with some of these ideas that he was going for. And
Also on this track, The Other Black Dog, the black dog is an image that sort of functions as a thematic motif that reoccurs on several songs of the record. What exactly do you think he's referring to with this image of the black dog?
there's two black dogs that he refers to. One is an image of racism, and the other is an image of depression. And he talks about those in different ways as you go throughout the album. I believe Black Dog was a callback to something he was called in Australia growing up in a predominantly white area, and so he
Hmm.
wants to talk about um, these two things as racism and as depression, and he wanted to talk about them without like going quite into like statistics and just numbing your brain with numbers, and he wanted to take a more personalized approach uh, and talk about experiences and ideas and feelings surrounding these two things. So you'll hear a lot of references to the Black Dog in various songs on this album, and in fact, to the point where it kind of feels like it was a should have been maybe the album title, but
So the idea of the black dog is that he's linking racism and depression together.
right, and certain times throughout these songs, he's talking about one or he's talking about the other one. Um, in the song that you mentioned just not long ago, "Waiting
Waiting
on
on
You,"
you?
yeah, yes, he
Yeah.
refers to the black dog or the merchant in this that he talks about with the black fur coat. In this one, he's specifically talking more about depression and how it kind of like uh, in this kind of metaphor as someone who's offering him, and it actually comes off when I read my notes as a very for anyone who's listened to Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick, it comes off very much like this Lucy figure that is dominant in that album.
And so let's move on to Centerfold, because you said you that was one of your least favorite tracks on the record.
Right. I think it's all right, but I just felt like some of the choppy vocal samples and the stutter rhythm came off a little bit tedious to me.
Yeah, it came off as being a little bit, like you said, workshopped, a little bit experimental, and a little less refined than some of the other tracks on the album. And I find when the album starts playing around with a lot of different production techniques and using different effects and stuff, that's when it starts to lose me a little bit. But when when the vision is very clear and he's keeping within the genres that influence him,
Mm-hmm.
um, even though I guess you could say, this is a nod to the new wave. But I guess in that sense you could say, whenever he really goes deep into this new wave pocket, I find the quality of the album dips a little bit versus the R&B, soul, and funk. Especially, he has such a great voice. I don't know why he's concealing it with these sound effects and distortion.
Right. I think he's trying to. I think he's lifting again from Kendrick Lamar when he does that. I think he's trying to create these like characters and
Hmm.
different motifs with his voice when he alters them. But I agree with you. Sometimes it comes off a little harder to listen to, and I wish the kind of effect that he put on it was a little different, or he strayed away from it because he does have a great range in
Yeah.
his vocal performance. There's several songs where he delivers a vocal performance that is completely different from another one. The one that stood out particularly to me, yes, "Smiling with No Teeth." He completely changes the title track of the album. He completely changes his vocal performance to be a very deep and kind of soulful a sample of his range, where he can be a lot creamier and like more Anderson Packy on some other tracks, and some other tracks he's kind of barking and more punk orientated. He kind of reaches like a bunch of like different places with his vocals that is really interesting and adds to the performances on this album.
Yeah, I agree, and it's just proof as to why it doesn't need to. I think sometimes the soundboard can be a little bit alluring, especially for young artists with a lot of ideas.
So, what were some of these like? What parts of the album attracted you the most? Because you said you listened to this beginning to end, right, a few times, but then after that you started picking and choosing your tracks. What tracks did you find yourself going back to?
Okay, yeah. So the tracks that stood out to me were "Waiting on You," "Drown," "Smiling with No Teeth." I really like "Whip Cracker," and then the track 13 and 14, a song about fishing and no looking back, which are some of the more very, I would say, stripped back R&B songs on the whole album. I thought
Right,
it was a nice that was a nice way to start closing down and winding down the mood of the album.
right. There's a particularly I think a song about fishing is an amazing track, but I want to talk to you a little bit about Drown. Because I did kind of struggle with Drown a little bit. I thought this one was a bit of more of his messy, eclectic songs that didn't quite land with me. What was it that you pulled from it?
I just of all those new wave nods, this was the one that made me feel the most nostalgic for that era of music, and I thought was the best of those types of songs that were executed on the track or on the album, sorry. And so that's why yeah, it stuck out to me.
But the ones that to me stood out and motivated my re-listens were similar to yours. The song with fishing, Whip Cracker. I Don't See Color was one. Gold Chains. Um, uh, the other Black Dog. Waiting on You is good as well, and Smiling with No Teeth. And that's like a lot of songs. And
Yeah.
uh, when you have an album of this size, and we say that some of these songs kind of feel like you need to trim the fat a little bit, it's not very much. I think you need to trim here. Um, Maybe a song or two. Bring it down to the 45-minute range or something. Because there's a lot of good, well-written songs here that really stand out and uh, shine gold in my opinion. While there's some like little meh songs in here, there's absolute gold on this album in terms of like the chorus work and how his understanding of beats and rhythm and keeping everything groovy and moving. It's so hard not to listen to this album and not feel a feeling of contentment with its energy, or just moving and grooving with it. Even though he does speak about themes of racism and depression, he kind of hides it under such funky and moving passages of instrumentation that it kind of gets it's kind of he's kind of like secretly sliding these stories in there as he has these interesting flows even over some of these beats throughout
Yeah,
this album.
yeah, with the social issues and the racial issues that he speaks about on the album, it's the melancholy is never reflected in the mood of the music.
Right.
Like you said, he sort of conceals it under these, funky melodies or some cool beats. And I would say it's not until you get to the more R&B orientated songs towards the end that the mood of the music reflects the same mood in the lyrics, the sentimentalism.
Yeah, I think that the best song to really kind of accentuate that point would be a song about fishing, which I'd like to talk about because I think it might be my favorite song on the album.
Okay, yeah. I really like No Looking Back, so it's interesting that you would pick the most similar track to it, but yeah, say it's your favorite song. So why exactly do you like a song about fishing so much?
It's just because of how simple it is and how carefree it comes off, and
Mm-hmm.
his vocal delivery or vocal melody on this track is so warm and embracing, and just kind of feels so carefree as he reads or he sings off his chorus. And rise and shine to dawn I wake to cast my net in a fishless lake, and he just sings this so smooth and his creamy voice, and he's saying more with it. Obviously, he's talking about this like fishless lakes analogy that he mentions in another song as well. Um, but I just enjoy this harmony that comes out in the song and this warmth that encompasses me when I listen to it. That I can't help but enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I like No Looking Back for all the same reasons, except that it also has a vocal harmony on the record or on the track, sorry, that makes it stand out to me above a song about fishing. But both very good tracks, I really like, and yeah, some beautiful vocal melodies that are just like you say, so warm and is a nice. I just think they're so perfectly placed, even though they're very similar and they're placed right next to each other. But after the sort of ambitious early part of the record, or the first 12 songs of the record, I thought they were a good way to sort of relax and sort of ease into the end of the album.
Right, right. It's just kind of a happy song. I just feel like, even though it's kind of like the melancholy and kind of dreamy, I can't help but feel content about the this imagery that he casts. Another song that I think you mentioned that I also really liked was Whip Cracker.
Yeah. Hmm.
Now, I enjoyed the energy, and when I say I enjoy the energy, I kind of talking about the sentiment of the song and the kind of approach he takes lyrically here. But I also just enjoy kind of like the minimalism that kind of encompasses the first half of this track. It's just
Hmm.
simply like a beat and just a little bit of flourishing here or there, and he flows over the top of it, and hitting his rhymes and staying on time. It really is compelling to listen to him and actually hear what he's saying. Um, and it's just a lot of like supporting and uh, defaming kind of like the racism and kind of like the more jaded and harsh people that are in society. I think he kind of specifically calls out people at bar and like sexual assault and stuff like that. And he just kind of like gives this kind of, I want to say social justicey kind of feel to it, but like
Okay.
not in a kind of a pretentious way. I would say I'm lacking the better word here, but just kind of being like a decent human, and I kind of like some of his lines here. You a woman beater, but you still want respect. Fucker bet. Sit your ass in prison, sucker. You get checked. I digress. Goofy motherfucker, slip and you get slept. Hope you wept. You ain't gonna get saved. I'm on my Malcolm X. And it's just like, that's the most like kind of like harsh and like direct and aggressive he gets on like the entire album. Uh, when he's like talking about these people uh, that he kind of like gets really pissed off with, and like he's jaded about, and like he's seen throughout his life as he's grown up. So I really like the song.
Yeah, to follow up, part of what I like about the record is the rap and hip hop elements don't go into this, intense violence and doesn't become really vulgar. It it rises above that,
Uh,
and
there are
this is an example.
there's some vulgars. Like this track is vulgar in a lot of its ways.
Yeah, but I mean, compared to gangster rap and stuff like this, I mean, it's pretty mild.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It's mild in that regard, and like the context and content of the song is a lot different, and the aggression is tunneled towards a little different of an object that you would might see in some other rap or hip hop, something like.
Yeah, yeah, I just think it's a progressive voice in hip hop and in rap,
Right.
getting beyond this you know violent mentality that saturates so much of that music. Um, Referring back to what you were saying earlier about the track sort of having two sides, part of the reason I like the track is because it's really well balanced. In the second half, I really get a lot of those Prince nods with because there's a guitar riff that
Hmm.
starts playing, and it has that really funky, Prince freestyle guitar riffs,
Right.
and yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, the first half has this kind of like metronome kind of beat to it, and then it gets into the second half, and then there's like the guitars that fill up that space in the background, and the sounds come and flourish around this kind of metronome beat, and he goes on top of that as well with an interesting flow, and I ended up really enjoying this song a lot.
And so you said you like gold chains also.
I did like Gold Chains. How did you feel about that song?
Well, why don't you explain first, since you like it? Not that I dislike it, but wasn't one of my favorites.
I thought it was like again one of these good examples of his versatility on the album. I thought it was a very groovy song. I'm gonna use the word creamy a lot because he exemplifies that a lot. I enjoyed the chorus on this as well. Uh, when it looks so gold, but it feels so cold inside these chains. Yeah, and he kind of goes back to that mentality as well. And he talks about kind of like this. Talks about fame, I would believe, or this kind of mentality around wearing chains and stuff in hip hop in general. And he kind of denounces kind of that ideal of wearing gold. And I think it's kind of accentuated again with kind of the image he projects with this face wrap and gold teeth and all these uh, gold finger rings and stuff. I think he's kind of criticizing that, and even though he kind of is adonishing it, I think it's more done in kind of a statement, and I think he brings that
Like,
statement here in this song, and I ended up enjoying the message of it, and even the chorus work, and it was very I thought it was one of his better pieces.
yeah, okay, yeah, so it's one of the more ironical songs, you could say.
I think it's a kind of like just a critique on hip hop culture. I think he's what he's making, and he wants to bring some attention to this idea about wearing gold chains and this um, and kind of the hypocrisy of it in some ways. And I think
Yeah,
he kind of goes into that topic, and I found it pretty compelling.
yeah, so like we were saying earlier at the beginning, how he wears, gold fronts and has gold rings on his fingers on the album cover, but really he's wearing it ironically because like this song demonstrates he's actually critiquing the image that has been built up around hip hop and rap and black artists in general.
And he's also making kind of this like black history kind of statement about like how his people has come from chains in some ways, being latched in slavery. That there's also like a statement that he's kind of making about these chains, and he's also making another statement about fame and how appealing that going for this fame and this goal kind of is a exemplification of fame, but it ends up being a chain instead that holds him down.
Yeah.
He talks about in the verse a bit about like, I hope the stress don't kill me. They chip away my heart and expect a coin to fill me. So he's kind of speculating upon his drive to be an artist in his young age, because I believe he's only like 22, and in kind of like these riches and fame that he's drawn to, but also being aware of kind of like the darkness that comes with it, and kind of the
Yeah, the superficiality of fame is a artistic limitation potentially.
right. So where did you come from when you heard this song?
It's not that I dislike Gold Chains, but I just thought musically it wasn't. It was one of the maybe more simpler songs. It really just has a steady beat lifted up, and then as the song progresses, it develops some more production flourishes and has a little bit of scratchy guitar in the background towards the end. Thought that similar to a lot of songs, it has a good culminating effect towards the end with all these production flourishes occurring, the guitar playing in the background, the beat still hitting, and sometimes there'll be like a vocal harmony playing. But it just didn't stand out necessarily against some of the other stronger tracks on the record. But after you broke down the lyrics just now, it's sort of got taken a new life for me. It seems more compelling.
What did you think of kind of these punkier tracks? Like we mentioned earlier, the second Black Dogs track, which is just like 2 minutes long, and On the Move, and you've kind of stated your opinion on the Move. How did you feel about the second Black Dogs track?
What I really liked about Black Dogs was that, to me, it was, I guess, the punk element of On the Move didn't occur to me at first because of the heavy production on that track.
Right.
However, with Black Dogs, Sorry, go ahead.
And I was saying that you probably had a lot of ideas about what you were about to listen to as you went into On the Move, that maybe that kind of misguided some of your views of it, maybe. Whereas by the time you get the Black Dogs, which is the 10th track, you kind of had seen more of the scope of the album, that a track like this kind of fit better. In a way that my comment on it is, I wish they didn't start with On the Move. I think On the Move would have fit somewhere in the middle a little bit better in terms of its pacing. But go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It is certainly not representative of the scope of the album. If anything, sort of pigeonholes it a little bit, and then I had this sort of pigeonholed mentality when I went further into the album. But as the album progressed, that wore away. However, Black Dogs has a really strong bass line.
Right, that was one of my highlights for this song as well. I thought the bass line was really the core of the song.
Yeah, and it has a great vocal performance too. Very sort of erratic and chaotic. Really cool.
Right, and that's again that punk energy that comes with it, and it's kind of its pacing as well. It comes and goes pretty quickly, but it does stand out among the playlist with how unique it is, because it is one of two songs that have that kind of energy. And the first song is more of a Death Grips kind of song that kind of transitions into more of an indie-tronic kind of feel. So it is a kind of a weird pseudo-punky song, where this is more straightforward.
Yeah, for sure. Even though, yeah, it certainly does have those death grip elements, but is more, yeah, that bass line just really holds up the track.
Right. You mentioned No Looking Back earlier. And I did want to talk about this song because I really did enjoy it. And I mostly enjoyed it because of the really creative twist that they, in the flip that they do on the Full House chorus.
Okay, yeah, that's funny because I was like, man, is this a cover of that Full House song? And I had to go look up what the Full House song was and read the lyrics to make sure it wasn't the same song.
Right, right. It's not the same song, but they deliver the chorus in that kind of same like vocal
Yeah.
melody, and it's a full flip and its full change is completely different. But at the same time, you can pull that influence out of it really definitively, and it's really creative. I think it's one of the better structured and ideal songs on the whole album. So I agree with you in liking that. I just did ended up leaning more towards Song About Fishing, but that was a fantastic track, and I just thought that was so clever.
Okay, I was a little bit embarrassed to admit that because I thought, oh man, I'm such an idiot, but that's a thing. Okay.
Well, that's what I imagine that's what was going on. Like we're both getting
Yeah.
the same reference popping at us, and I really thought that there was just a flip on that, very
Hmm.
intentional. I thought, and moved from there because it is very different. And he even changes the line he says on the song, but it's all in that same cadence and it seems pretty on the nose to me. So I really
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
the chorus definitely has the same melody as the as that Full House theme song.
Right, right. So I thought that was cute and I liked it. So I was into that one. So I also really enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we covered like most of the highlights of the album.
Do you want to mention "Smiling with No Teeth" since it's the title track?
I did mention it kind of in passing, but please, anything that you'd like to add?
So this track is again one of the more socio-political tracks on the album, and he sort of covers a lot of topics on the in the lyrics. What stood out to me was how he seems like he's putting forward a narrative that it's like a feel good, bittersweet narrative. Obviously, smiling with no teeth, like someone who's being beat up,
Hmm.
but it's maintaining a positive attitude. However, he does go into some critiques of, I guess, especially with a lot of the Black Lives Matter events that happened last year and the protests in the United States and around the world last summer about speaking up and being and actively taking part in forwarding black rights and equal rights and people who support it but don't do anything about it.
Right. There's also like that imagery of smile or cry. Many
Hmm.
he writes here. Many cries have cried with no tears. Too many smiles cracked with no teeth. And the image I kind of got with this is kind of optimism and hopefulness and drive for the future through trauma and repression and racism and stuff like that. To me, it kind of came off as him speaking about his traumas and his depression and his experiences with the black dogs that he talks about throughout the album. Um, and here he kind of gives this metaphor of smiling with no teeth, which is like this image of like smiling through the pain and through the trauma
Hmm.
of someone who like through this image of having their teeth knocked out or something like that, and still being more. And I think he kind of lives that mantra.
Yeah, and I didn't find either. It's like he's speaking directly, whereas some of the other tracks, as you mentioned, develop a persona or some sort of character.
Hmm.
Whereas this song, it's more confessional, I found, and for that reason, yeah, struck me deeper.
Okay. Um, if you were to kind of conclude this album a little bit in your thoughts, how would you kind of speak about it?
So I would characterize the album as being a record that has a broad range, but fundamentally encompasses R&B, soul, funk, and some new subgenres of punk rock.
Hmm. Um,
And
Go ahead. I agree with that. There's definitely a noviceness here, I think, where this is a debut album, but there's so much ambition and intent and creative juices flowing here that I would say that it does a really good job with some of its pacing and keeping itself the tempo going, and its creativity and song ideas are always coming out new. I just think there's a little bit too much, a little too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing.
hmm
Sometimes I think he's going a little too far in that direction, that it kind of takes away from the track, and sometimes when he strips back a bit, he accomplishes just as much. So I would say that there's a little bit of um, a learning experience here with Genesis as he's kind of coming into his own, and maybe he will develop further going down the line with just as creative and just as unique voices and commentary and songs and influences, but maybe he can clean it up a little bit. And I think it's a little dirty around the edges, but there's so many great songs on this, so many peak and so many hits that I was really pleased with how this album turned out, even with some of its my minor gripes.
Yeah, similar to what I was saying about Pupil Slicer last week, it's an example of a debut artist that, as you were saying, is so full of ideas, ambition, and wants to and is so earnest and wants to do such a good job that they sort of overdo it a little bit,
Right.
and as a result, the album can sometimes seem like it's a little bit it's sprawling. It's not as focused as it could be at times
Right,
because
right.
it's trying to do too much.
And there's like concept. There is a kind of like a concept album under in here as well. That he does talk about a bit different subjects and stuff. So I enjoyed that. You can definitely tell that this guy is inspired by Kendrick and how he formulates his albums. But I think he's a little novice and I'll say immature or green in terms of how he wants to put his albums together and how he wants to convey his voice. Uh, and I think that will come with time, and I think will that come with more experience and a little more discipline.
hmm Yeah.
So in the end, I was very happy with this album. What would you put in as kind of your uh, try this song, your toe in song?
Toe-in song, hey?
I think it's.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a trick.
Go ahead.
Why don't you go ahead? You seem like you've got a clear idea. I don't.
Well, I was actually going to give you a little bit out because I think this album, because of its context of versatility and variety, is hard to pick a song to encompass um, the entirety of the album and kind of what you're going to experience. So I kind of want to suggest two songs to kind of give a little bit of A and a little bit of B.
hmm
I think a song about fishing would be there, and maybe Whip Cracker. I would put those two.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, me too. I was definitely gonna say Whip Cracker, and then I was flirting with, yeah, No Looking Back,
Which is
or maybe,
Yeah, your mirror, the mirror of a song about fishing, for me.
yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
can agree with that. Um, how'd you end up rating it?
I think I'm gonna settle on a 8.
Yeah, I
If
agree
it
with you.
was if it was if it was tighter, I would give it a 9.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
it's just missing that it is missing the sort of focus that a 9 needs to have.
yeah, I agree with you. This is definitely leaning towards a 9. And again, if there was just a little bit of cleaning, a little cleaner around the edges, a little more focus, a bit of trimming, just some small stuff. A good editor or a good producer could come in and help with this. Um, he would definitely move up to a 9 or maybe even a 10 if it really kind of got down to the core songs that were just really, really there. Um, I really enjoyed the album. I was pretty content with this. I think this is a fantastic debut release. 8 is going to be my score as well. Strong recommend attached to that. I think a lot of people will find something on this album to enjoy.
Yeah, it pulls from so many influences that, and it keeps on. It surprises me when I listen to it because, as you mentioned earlier, with the vocal performances, sometimes you feel like you're listening to a different artist. Sometimes.
Right, absolutely, because again, he goes from his Prince pocket where he's really kind of like embodying him to a pocket where it feels like he's embodying Kendrick to another one where he feels like he's embodying an old soul singer, and then somewhere else he's embodying MC Ride, and it's like it's all his own voice, and he kind of goes all over the place. That it's hard again to suggest the Tawin song, but it's also hard to describe the overall package that you get here. I just think that I listen and you'll definitely find a lot of songs in here if you have a little bit of patience to go through that you'll definitely enjoy.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so we were talking a little bit before we start that there's a few albums I think we're really excited to cover. We definitely got Shoo Shoo coming down the line, and I believe Death from Above was also one we're talking about.
Both released today.
It's a good release day, absolutely. I think this was a good album to kind of whet our palate before going into those, and I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, so one of those albums will be coming at you next week.
Right. I also want to talk. I wasn't sure if I was going to put it here or wait for another omnibus, but I did listen to another album in the last week from a artist called Lil Mariko, uh, if I pronounce that right. It's only like 7 songs in 16 minutes, right? It's a very
Mm-hmm.
It's a hyper pop album, and it's characterized. And this is gonna sound. This is not gonna be for everyone. I'm gonna. I don't know how to explain this. It's how about I read the titles of the songs for you, and maybe you'll get an idea what I'm talking about. Uh, first, so-
Um,
first song is called "Hi, I'm a Slut." Uh, third song, "100 Dicks," and seventh song is "Cat Boys." And these are these hypersexual, hyper pop, kind of the persona of a hentai character singing these hyper pop choruses in these short beady songs, and it's like it's so good actually, but it's full of like this energy and personality that is really unique, and it's not going to be for everyone, and it definitely won't be. But I thought this was a great outing and very interesting, and I'm curious how where she goes from here. This is definitely something unique that I think some people might want to check out.
yeah, I was spying you listening to this artist on Spotify earlier this week, and so I clicked on the artist, and then I seen the names of the songs. The first one being called "I Am a Slut," and I thought, well, my God, that's intriguing. And then I clicked on her bio just to see how she describes herself, and she describes herself as like it's all over the place. It's a hyper pop, and then she says something about metal
Yeah,
and a few other genres she references.
yeah, she definitely has this
And
like metal performances on some of these songs where she goes and screams parts of it. It's very unique.
okay,
It's this. It's a
uh-huh.
very like Gen Z kind of artist that I think it hits this like guilty spot for me, where like I'm kind of like listening to it in like this car crash kind of way, but like I'm actually genuinely enjoying it. So it's like
Okay.
I have to come to terms with that. I like this album, uh, and I want someone else to listen to it and rationalize my appeal here.
It definitely seems a little bit on the campy side, but it seems like some of these, especially younger artists who are part of the Gen Z generation, they are. It's almost like they're playing a type of character or something. They're like these
Right.
exaggerated personalities.
This is definitely the case for this one. It's a hypersexual, hyperpop. That's basically all I can say about it. And I hope some people go and give it a listen. That's a light recommend for you at the end of the episode here.
And what was the name of the artist again?
Lil Mariko, uh, Mariko.
Okay, cool.
All right, maybe if you listen to it, Zach, you'll have to give me your response on next week's episode because I think you'll hate this, but that's fine with me. That's fine with me.
Yeah, I checked it out, and when I looked at the profile, I clicked away, very
Yeah,
with a very awkward, having a very awkward feeling.
yeah. The whole there's a I'm pretty sure Cat Boys, for example, is a pegging anthem. She talks about pegging her cat boys, and not gonna take it easy on them, and then she wants her cat boy jizzies, and it's cringe, but it's also so good. It's great. I can't. It just gets stuck in my head, and I just like it. So I'm not even gonna defend it anymore.
It sounds interesting. What can I say?
Exactly. And it's a 16 minutes quick listen. But we'll be back next week with one of those albums, maybe a different album. We'll see. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. We've been definitely looking forward to the Shoo Shoo record, so I'm excited to really sink my teeth into that one.
All right, until next time.
Until next time.